So right up front, um, I like to point out that the talks are about something very particular. They're always about um, the same topic. I might try and approach it from different angles sometimes. There's usually more or less a consistent angle as well, but the topic is the same. The topic is essentially happiness in daily living. And it turns out that really what we're talking about when we talk about happiness is peace of mind. That is the happiness that, in the context of this talk, is available on a continuous, unbroken basis. And I would suggest it's the only happiness that is really available in a satisfying and fulfilling manner. Uh, Happiness through unbroken peace of mind, meaning when there is unbroken peace of mind, that's when we realize, oh, this is happiness. This is when I can say, I am happy. And when that sets in, when that peace of mind sets in, and we realize, oh, this is happiness, this is when I can say, oh, I am happy in life, then we realize, wow, happiness is not at all what I thought it was, not at all what humanity thinks happiness is, because humanity is seeking happiness. But by and large, when we look at our motivations, our movements, and humanity in large, the movement is for seeking happiness, but in outcomes. Happiness through success, through pleasure, different forms of pleasure. So essentially, a circumstantial happiness. That means, oh, we feel I'm not happy now, and if I can build a house, if I can succeed, if I can invent something, if I can fall in love, then I will be happy. So you can see that the search for happiness is essentially a search for happiness through outcomes. And so if you can um, register this when it happens in your own experience, in your own movements, and register it and go, tick, that concept is what is happening. Now, someone might say, might register it and feel bad about it. Oh, that's what's happening. And it's, I'm looking for happiness in the wrong spot. But there can be a different attitude. And it's like, now I see it is true that there is a deeply ingrained assumption in the system that says happiness is to be found in outcomes. And what can very easily happen is that we engage in teachings, and a teaching really often, at least as I would like to put it forward, is pointing out things that are important for us to come to see, to really come to understand, so we are intimately familiar with them as part of the landscape. Meaning they're always part of the landscape. It's just that we haven't put our finger on them. Attention hasn't landed on them. We probably haven't thought it's important to understand certain things because we're looking for outcomes instead of maybe inquiring into the nature of life and certain other objectives that are less important than pleasure outcomes. So if we start landing on these things for ourselves, it's the deepening of the understanding. It starts off as an intellectual understanding. See, I talk a lot to provide some food for thought of a very specific type, a thought that can deepen the understanding. And that understanding, that deepening understanding, really has the effect of uprooting all of the misunderstanding in the system. It's not really about gaining more knowledge. It's not about being able to stand up and give discourses and be an expert um, in this field, or have a lot of information. The information is useful because it goes into the system, and it essentially acts as a antivirus, like an antibiotic, and uproots, dissolves the beliefs that are um, held in place based on um, an opposite assumption to what is being pointed out. And so if we start to see something and we start to understand a certain principle, then the beliefs that are based on the not understanding of that principle get eroded and get challenged and eventually dissolve. And so you see, here's one of the paradoxes. Um, we're often told that the end result of seeking liberation or enlightenment has nothing to do with the intellect. It's not about gaining more information. That's what I've just suggested. And that's it, is because once the seeking process has done its job, what's left is an emptiness, you could say. An emptiness because let's say all the filing cabinets where the old beliefs that were based on seeing life a certain way, where they existed, that filing cabinet, all the files have been deleted, thrown away, shredded, because the system understands, oh, that was sort of all wrong conclusions. Now, we might think that, oh, well, and so what we've now done is we've filled up all the files with the new information. And in fact, it doesn't really work like that. The new information is pretty useless, except for the purpose of dissolving the misinformation. And so the system essentially throws the new information out. At least it doesn't turn it into a set of beliefs. And that's why we sometimes get the pointer that says, once you've used the tool to do the job and the job is no longer needed, then you don't need to carry the tools around with you. If you've crossed the river, you don't need to keep carrying the boat on your back. Ramana Maharshi has illustrated this by creating an analogy to the spiritual seeking process. And the analogy says that use this thorn to uproot the deeply embedded thorn in your thumb. So you use this thorn to unpick, to dislodge the thorn that has become lodged in your thumb, and then be sure to throw both thorns away. And so in that metaphor, this thorn, the new thorn, is essential, is a concept, a spiritual teaching concept. The thorn embedded in your thumb is a concept that has become a belief, believed to be true, believed to be absolutely the way something is. And so the notion of the thorn embedded is a concept embedded. So that to me is what I would call a belief, where a concept is held as truth. And so it's saying use this new thorn, this new concept. The spiritual teachings are always giving us concepts like you are not the body, or you are awareness, or you are not the doer, or there is no free will, or everything is a dream. Thousands of concepts. You just need to open up a book, any book on spirituality, any book on anything, and read a sentence, and that's a concept. It's not the truth. But it could be very useful at undoing a bit of misinformation. And so essentially there is this pointer, or within that pointer we can start to realize that what Ramana is telling us is that the teachings are not the truth, but they are very useful. But don't hold on to them as if they're truth, because if that happens, you've uprooted one thorn, which is one belief, using the spiritual teaching concept, but then that has become embedded in your thumb as the new belief, oh, I am not the body. Everything is God's will. So there's a concept within this teaching framework. And that concept says that whatever is said in this teaching, in any teaching, anything that anyone has ever said in the past or will ever say in the future about spiritual seeking, about enlightenment, liberation, or about any other topic, is a concept. Whatever has been said is a concept and not the truth. The only truth in the manifestation is the impersonal sense of I am. So when, as we go through the process of seeking, we receive a lot of information, we read a lot, and at certain points we might even feel like, I don't want any more. In fact, more information is making my thinking more intense. And so that's a great realization if that's actually happening. And we say, stop, enough information. I don't want anything else to think about. And what that might show us is that thinking is actually the problem, or thinking of a certain type is the problem. And that can lead to a sort of allergy towards concepts, where we realize that whenever we're given a concept, we grab onto it and we look for truth in it. And we keep trying to work out and find the truth using the concept. And so if we start to see how we just keep thinking more and more and more, and we say, stop, no more concepts, that might actually bring us to the place of the impersonal sense of I am. Because when these filing cabinets get emptied out and they don't get refilled with the new concepts, so they too start being let go of, essentially. We go, oh, the truth isn't going to be found in all of the new concepts. Like, I'm not the doer, or everything is an illusion, or, any of the different teaching frameworks. They're very useful. So, but at some point we have to free ourselves from a dependency on them, and that might allow us to get to this place of just being, no thinking, realizing that there is freedom outside of thinking. Now, this stopping, this freedom outside of thinking, simply isn't available to us when the system is filled up, when all these filing cabinets are filled up with the false beliefs about who we are, and therefore, as a consequence of the wrong idea of who we are, where our happiness is to be found. And it's not only the wrong idea of who we are, it's a wrong idea about what life is. And all of those ideas have been put in place based on, they're not something that we've consciously put in place. They sneak up on us as part of our development as a human being, from a newborn baby up to, so the newborn baby suddenly starts receiving information, not only in conceptual form, but visual sounds and sense of touch. And the brain then starts putting all of that together based on repetition. And that then forms, without us even knowing, our conclusions about what life is and who we are. And it turns out that those conclusions are understandable because they're based on how life presents, but they're not at all in line with what those individuals in history that have awakened from that sort of dream, that spell, that set of beliefs, then it's not at all what we're told we are from that awakened perspective. And so when that belief structure is in place, then a stopping of thinking doesn't and can't happen. Why? Because essentially the identity that is living life is a conceptually based identity, an identity that has been constructed based on assumptions and conclusions that are no longer able to be held in a healthy way by our own system. Essentially, ideas, opinions, conclusions, so essentially thinking, concepts, are assumed to be truth by the system. And in fact, a concept cannot be the truth. And so what gets put in place is an idea of ourself that is, by and large, a conceptual idea of ourself, an image, a conceptual image. And once that's in place, it's that conceptual image that lives life. And so life is essentially lived through the faculty of thought as the main filter. And so the seeking process can actually be very frustrating when someone comes across the teachings that encourage a stopping of thinking, suggest that freedom is outside of thought and requires a connection to our being. that can be very frustrating, because if something doesn't interfere with that conceptual identity, the conceptual identity only knows how to try and think its way out of wherever it is, and that tends to keep us stuck on that dimension of thinking that is not the dimension of being that the teachings are pointing at. So that conceptual identity tends to block access to something deeper inside of the human being, a deeper essence. And that deeper essence that I've referred to earlier as the impersonal sense of I am, also referred to as the self, that which is true. And the reason it's referred to as true, as opposed to what we have come to know ourselves as, is because it's on a different dimension to thinking. And so once we become familiar with thought, so part of the seeking is about starting to look at thought, to look at concepts, to look at beliefs, to realize how changeable our beliefs are from one moment to the other, to realize how changeable they are when we get new information, to see how easily we take a concept and treat it as truth. So you might watch a documentary, and if we haven't inquired into the nature of thought and concepts and truth before, what happens is we listen to a documentary that presents a particular angle on a person or on a topic or whatever. We get information. After that, we're talking about it as if what we've heard was the truth, meaning without any capacity to discern or to understand that it was one person, the documentary maker's perspective on it. And so if we see that, we might realize, oh, look how easily I take a concept and turn it into truth. Just take the concept of Santa Claus. And as a child, we hear about Santa Claus and we believe that it's true. We see presents under a tree and we're told that it was from Santa Claus. And so it further reinforces it is true. And the notion of God, there's any number of different concepts of God, who God is, what he wants, how he operates. And there's a huge proportion of the population that just believes in the God they've been told about without realizing it's a belief. And so the realm of thinking, the realm of belief, is really, because of its changeability, very relative description. It's a description of its color. It's not a description of its sweetness, for example. or of its shape. And not all apples are red, some apples are green. So the concept, the apple is red, is relatively accurate for some apples. But if we think that apple is red is some truth, then we would need all apples to be red. And so we inquire into thinking and we start to see the changeability of it and the relativity of it, the coming and going of our thoughts. Then we could start to say, oh, that's why if we know ourselves through concept, it's probably not who we really are, but rather an idea about who we are. And it's probably quite limited, quite relative, quite changeable. And for as long as we relate to the relative as if it is absolute, meaning as long as we take something that is relative and see it as truth, then we won't be able to see the truth, which is different to that, because we will think we're seeing the truth. So that's a large part of the ignorance, the error that has been forced on us. We are a conceptual entity, and that faculty of thinking has gone out of control a little bit, where it doesn't realize it's the limitations of thinking. And it's thinking that can become aware of the nature of thought and start to appreciate the limitation of thinking. And that becomes the beginning of the loosening of the prison bars, because it means that we might start to look for ourselves on a level outside of thought. And that level outside of thought is accessed through the body, through what we could say is feeling. Now it's not that this deeper essence is on the level of the body, as in the physical. Thinking doesn't, or feeling doesn't require you to think what you feel. In fact, when you are feeling, it requires the opposite of you thinking what you feel, but it requires you to feel what you feel. And because we're this conceptual entity, we may have lost touch with even the capacity to feel and appreciate that there is a whole layer outside of our thinking. So, just going back to where I started from, we often hear a teaching that says, look, the answer isn't going to be found in thinking. In fact, freedom is outside of thinking. And so the reason that that's said is because when it's heard enough times by a seeker will start to have reason to avert thinking, to look for the realm outside of thought, to stop trying to find one's happiness, one's freedom, one's true nature through the process, through the faculty and the way of solving problems that we are accustomed to. It's why we're told there's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go. You're already enlightened. Now, that's a concept. It's not necessarily true, but what it's trying to say is if only you would stop, which really means not that you can stop, but if the right set of blows are struck and the thinking, it clicks that the thinking is the problem. And in an instant, someone might find themselves out of thinking and realize, oh, look at what's in the background. Look at what is underneath that stream of thinking. And so when we feel, or when that happens, it is tangible that nothing's really been achieved or gained or added in, but it's just a falling backwards or a stopping to reveal what is there already. So it's not really a process of like having an empty canvas and needing to paint a painting. It's more a process of having a painting that's covered with a sheet, and for the wind to come in and blow the sheet off. And so then we said, you always had the painting. Whereas seeking often includes the same movement because it hasn't been undone, that existed before seeking happened, which is, oh, I need to go find what I don't have. I need to get something in order to be happy. So conclusion of life from a young age is about more, about getting, because that's been the experience is, I'm hungry, so I need to get food to fix that. I'm tired, so I need to get sleep to fix that. I'm scared, so I need to get comfort to fix that. So when we start seeking, the assumption, it makes sense, that's all we understand is, okay, what do I need to get to have liberation? So just before I round it up and have some questions, let's make it clear that liberation, in a very simple, practical terms, means peace of mind, and peace of mind is the quietness underneath the thinking mind, and the thinking mind is suffering. So liberation is the end of suffering. What is the end of suffering? It's peace of mind. What are the forms of suffering? In practical terms, they're guilt and blame and pride and worry and expectation. So guilt for all of those actions and way of being and behaving and all of the past outcomes that we see as being a result of the things that I did, and when the outcomes are not favorable, not pleasurable, then this assumption of I am the one that did that and I should have done it better, and the whole narrative based on the attitude of personal doership, coupled with the belief that happiness is to be found in pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. And so we look back and we look at all these reasons that we've sabotaged our happiness, all these situations in life which are pain, and we see that as an attack on our happiness that we have instigated, that we have that we are responsible for. And so we then feel guilt and shame. We have a sense of not being good enough. And then there are all of those actions that the other delivers. And so all of those outcomes that the other delivers to us that deliver pain, which is not pleasure, which is what we believe our happiness is to be found in, we then have to hate the other for what they have done to hurt us, which is really an attack on my happiness, or at least that's how it's received. And so there's resentment and hatred and animosity, jealousy towards the other. So that's guilt and blame. Pride is the same as guilt, but instead of attitude of personal doership and attachment to the outcomes that delivered painful outcomes, pride is the attitude of doership and attachment to outcome to those actions that delivered good outcomes. And then we say, look what I achieved. Me as the doer, because we've got that attitude towards the unfortunate outcomes. where we didn't tell the truth, or we stole something, or we didn't show up for a friend, or we failed in a subject at school, I don't know, any number of behaviors or actions in life, broke a vase, didn't get the right shopping, whatever. Because we see that as my doing, we're bound to have the same attitude to ourselves. And so those actions that deliver good results, then pride kicks in. And so worry and anxiety is based on our attachment to outcome. The attachment to outcome really means the deeply ingrained belief that my happiness is to be found in outcomes. And so that conceptual entity is forced to look into the future and feel afraid about what the outcomes of the future might be. And so when it imagines the future and it imagines certain outcomes, because it is it is a conceptual entity, that imagination of the future is registered as if it's real. And so then the worry and the anxiety arise as feelings that are very convincing and are very real on the level of feeling. And it's an uncomfortableness with oneself. It's like, I am at risk, I am in danger in the future. And that's, in a way, why life can be so uncomfortable, because life is always uncertain. And so if we've got this attitude of attachment to outcome, which means I know myself as something that is incomplete and will be complete when I get X, Y, and Z, or when people are nice to me, or as long as nothing goes wrong from now. That's a very fragile sense of who we are. And life doesn't tend to cooperate with that version of life. So when we wake up in the morning and we wake up into life, some human structures feel extremely uncomfortable just being awake. It's a reminder of being in a place that can threaten that very fragile sense of self. And the last form of suffering is expectation and attachment to outcome, which is also based on this idea that I need pleasure and outcomes in order to be complete. And so we then find the thinking mind continually thinking about what I need to do in the future and how I'd like life to turn out, which essentially means we're not able to connect to that part of ourselves that is outside of thinking, because we've got a very important job to do, which is to imagine how we need life to be in order for it to be best for us. And then we need to keep thinking about it so we can make it happen. And peace of mind is the realization that that's not any of those guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation are not valid thought processes when it comes to peace of mind. They're very valid when it comes to suffering. That's the best way to suffer. It's the only way to suffer. So if that's your objective, then they're very valid thinking processes. But as far as peace of mind goes, peace of mind is the absence of suffering, the end of suffering. And so that type of habit, essentially, it's a habit. It's a functioning of the human being functions, and it's developed in a way that it habitually functions with this active thinking. And that needs to be interfered with if peace of mind is going to kick in. And so if those are the forms of suffering, and they're based essentially on the belief in personal doership, which allows guilt, blame, and pride to arise, and coupled in with that, the notion that my happiness or who I am, my completeness, is to be found in having more, better, love from the other, material gain. That's our idea of who we are. And so the way that that set of habits can get broken is if we start to investigate along the lines where I'd suggest that we are not the doers, that we are not able to function any differently to the way that we function. That's the concept, that's the description that I'm putting forward, that the human being is actually an amazingly complex biological instrument that has been designed by life. Means life has put in place the genetic structure that came together when the sperm and the egg joined, and then that structure, following some magical blueprint, grew into a fetus and then was born as a child. And from the point of conception, that biological structure was never separate from the conditioning of the environment it was in. And when you look at the human being on a biological and psychological level, it is 100% a result of those two factors. The physical structure in combination with how the environment has impacted it in terms of the new conditioning, we can call that new conditioning, that was delivered each moment. And each time new conditioning comes in, it becomes part of our up-to-date conditioning. And the human being at any point in time is always that, a result of the genetic structure and the up-to-date conditioning up to that very point in time, and it functions according to its design. Its design includes the conditioning that we can call ignorance, that says, oh, I could have done it differently. I as this independent chooser chose the wrong course of action, or spoke the wrong way. Now, sure, we might the speaking might have happened in a way that led to a bad outcome, but what we need to see is that attitudinally, that is what happened because that was how the biological instrument was, and it found itself in a particular circumstance. And so the circumstance isn't in our control. We sort of just find ourselves, the circumstance is always changing around us. And so we find ourselves in the ever-changing circumstance. And if you take a snapshot of the circumstance at a moment, it's one way and not in our control. And if you take a snapshot of the human being, that snapshot is the genes and up-to-date conditioning. And the combination of the genes and up-to-date conditioning and the circumstance delivers the output, the feelings, the thoughts, the words, the actions, the reactions. And it's really impersonal. You know, another way of saying that is that life is completely predetermined. Everything happens according to God's will. that the words that come out of my mouth, that come out of your mouth, the actions, the hand movements, the bird flying across, all of that is not anyone's doing, and therefore it's God's doing. And notice how when you hear God's will, you will have your own concept of what God is, and so therefore that will be, then there'll be a superimposition of your concept of God with a will. So the explanation that is quite a materialistic and causal explanation, the genes and the conditioning and the circumstance you're in, that has to be accurate on some level. In life, on the level of relative human life, it is a causal and a relative experience. And so even if ultimately causality is not the ultimate reality, we can't look at it as unreal, because the real, that has created life, has created causality as the mechanism by which life unfolds. So things can be explained on that level. That doesn't mean it's the only way that things can be explained, but it means on that level it's valid. And what it shows us, in a way that if you think about it, I mean, people might not like the sounds of what's concluded by that line of thinking, that we're not the doer, that everything's happening. Some people really love it. They hear it and they go, oh, what a relief. And that's when the deeper part of us hears it. It goes, what a relief. I'm not the doer. It means this load of guilt and blame that we've carried around for so long gets removed. It falls away because the basis on which it's being held in place is undermined. For if that's received by the doer in us, the one that wants to be in control because that means it can get its happiness that it believes will be found in getting outcomes, the doer in us doesn't want to hear we're not the doer. It actually feels completely challenged by that notion. It's taken as a personal attack by the belief in personal doership. So it might not sit well with someone. But I haven't taken the route of saying today everything that happens is happening according to God's will. Because if I said that, it can sound religious. And actually, I'd have to because we spoke about the limitation of having beliefs. So that's why I'd rather put it in a way that says this has got nothing to do with beliefs. Take a look at how you came about in this world. This is what baffles me sometimes, or it doesn't really baffle me, because it just proves how deeply ingrained the such a simple concept, which is take a look at how you came about and see that before you were conceived there was nothing, then a certain event happened, and sperm and egg come together, and that's how animals develop and grow, and then the animal grows because of conditioning. And it's really very impersonal. I'm speaking English because I grew up in an English-speaking English-speaking country. If I didn't, I wouldn't be able to speak English, and that wouldn't be my doing. That would just be a consequence of the life situation I found myself in, something completely out of my control. So the fact that I speak language has nothing to do with me. The fact I speak English has nothing to do with me. It's just a result. It's an output of the biological instrument's design. So I find it interesting when, let's say, especially outside of the teaching realm, if I were to have a conversation with sometimes very educated and intelligent, people, and I lay it out in very simple terms, not asking them to believe me, but just even to doctors and biologists, and the doership inside is so strong it just doesn't allow them to hear the simple logic. So I'm really not asking anyone to believe me. I'm just saying, think about it yourself. And then see any of your thoughts. They'll continue to happen as they always have. So not being the doer doesn't take anything away. Not being the doer is just an explanation of how things have always happened, automatically as a result of factors outside of our control. What this leads to is that in practice we will function as if we are the doer. So, a tap is on and we see the tap, and a thought arises, oh, let's turn the tap off, and your hand moves towards the tap and turns it off. So in practice, we have the feeling of free will. And it's not only a feeling of free will, it is the free will of the instrument to function the way it's designed, which looked at from another point of view means there is no such thing as individual free will. There is no such thing as the free will of a free thinker or of a separate individual entity, but rather there is the functioning of all of life, and the human being is one aspect of life. And what is the importance of this is the implication. If I'm not the doer and life is happening, then the psychological suffering may start to get cut off. Because when you look at all the suffering, the guilt and the blame and the pride, it's based on the assumption I could have done it differently. Now, you might do it differently next time. If you do it differently next time, it's a result of your genes and up-to-date conditioning, which would include the time before when you didn't do it differently. And that may become part of your system. That means next time it happens differently. But who knows? Just have to wait and see. So just in wrapping it up, from this perspective, there's the notion that 90% of life is predetermined, or we have no free will, but 5% or 10% we have free will over. That if someone's running with that idea, they're running with the idea because it sort of feels good. It's a concept that feels good to them, rather than a concept that makes that that they've investigated for themselves. And the reason that someone would run with that idea is because they're hearing these concepts. You have complete free will, let's say, where someone says nothing is destiny or God's will or predetermined. It's you've got complete free will. And they're hearing that, oh, that's someone's belief. And then someone else says, oh, you have no free will. Everything is happening according to God's will, or happening to according to your genes and up-to-date conditioning. And they go, oh, that's another concept that he has. Well, I'm going to have my own one. What about, I think it's nice if it's 90% predetermined and 10% free will. Why not? I'll run with that one. And that's, to me, it makes sense. That's it makes sense that we would do that, but that we do that when we don't realize that we need to be able to see these explanations as more than just a concept that we like or we dislike, and we hang on to, grab onto the ones we like. Let's look at the explanation as to why we're told that things can only happen the way they happened, and that is destiny. So in each moment they're going to happen one way. So one way in this moment, and one way in the next moment, one way in the moment after that, one way in the moment after that, and that is destiny. And there's no scope for it to be different. That doesn't mean that destiny won't include someone coming up to a crossroads where they have been told to always pick the left fork, and for their whole life they have picked the left fork. And it doesn't mean that at some point they're going to come up to a crossroad and they could pick the right fork. But if they pick the right fork, it's because that was always going to happen, because they are picking the right fork based on their genes and up-to-date conditioning in that moment. So the notion that we have no control doesn't mean that life can't change radically in any direction at any point in time. It can. It doesn't mean that you have there's no hope for change. Life is always change. It just means we don't know what is destined. And so if we assume that destined is lefts all the way, and then we say, but I can take the right road, and then we say, oh, so if I take the right road, then I'm no longer following destiny. And I'd say, well, if you took the right road, it was destiny for there to be left turns all the way until it was destiny for the right turn to happen. So when we look at the explanation that says life can only turn out one way, and that explanation is that all of the thinking, all of the decision making, who is thinking? Who is deciding? it's a conditioned biological instrument. And so therefore, all the decisions are from the conditioned biological instrument. There's nothing wrong with conditioned. I'm not saying, the capacity to speak, the capacity to know left from right is all conditioning. It's not a problem. It's just an explanation that says any decision is from the biological instrument that is made up from its genes and up-to-date conditioning that we weren't in control of. And so if that's understood, we go, there's no question of 10% my decisions and 90% God's decisions. They're all your decisions, but your decision is based on how you are in each moment, and that is out of your control. And whether that freaks someone out or whether it creates belief is destiny. Okay, so let's take some questions. Hi, hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, okay. So I maybe turn my video on.
Yeah, go ahead. I can hear you in the meantime.
Yeah, okay. So, hello, Roger, for today. It was great to hear you again. Yeah,
thank you.
It's very nice to when you can phrase all your understanding in the satsangs. It's very nice and important pointings, which keeps us in not suffering.
Yes.
Yeah, I am now. Okay. So hello. Yeah, I have a little bit of bad. I don't know how it's called in English. Okay. Yeah. So back to the topics. Yeah. So I'm glad of your talk, and maybe can we explore what this sense of being, impersonal sense of beings means, and if we can find some qualities in there, because you said it's like nothing, but is it like nothing like in physics you have like empty space? Like I think the space has, I think is not a good word in here. So like the qualities of, we can go there.
Sorry, I missed the last. Just repeat the last 10 seconds.
I'm just curious about, can you describe the qualities of this like sense of being part, like not personal, like that we feel ourselves as like this. I think you because you don't put this in your mouth, but like part of God, something like that. Like God.
So the sense of being is when a door opens up. Let's say the door is when we have access to a functioning outside of the thinking mind. So the best that I could say is that if our thinking stops, then we don't go anywhere. The room doesn't go anywhere. The trees don't go anywhere. It's just that there is a seeing of all of that without the filter of thinking. And that faculty of being, which really means to see directly, and see directly means to not see through the conceptual lens of what does this mean about me? You know, what does it, is this good or is it bad? So that the thinking is always looking at a situation and assessing it as whether it is good or bad. And the stopping or the resting in being is to look at life as it is, right? Which means no more good and bad, but where good and bad as concepts don't need to be there. Where we realize that when we have this concept of good and bad, we are pushing away the bad or the painful and wanting it all to be pleasurable. And so just being with what is where we appreciate that life is about duality, so good and bad, and that we can just sit and be and see life from outside of the thinking mind.
Can you say that this like being recognition have some like innocence? I don't know. I'm not sure that my pronunciation is good. This part, like the child quality in innocence, that we have like the sense of as the sense of awe, like like amazement about that this is like this happening, and it's happening, but we don't know why. It's like it shouldn't be here. We are like amazed that it's here, and this is like wow. It's it's very simple. It's like it exists.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, so the word innocence is there to sort of imply a simplicity, right? So the child is much simpler than an adult. They have less opinions on and less understanding. So then, you know, when I mean less understanding, the adult has grown up with its attachments to good and bad, and so as soon as it sees something, it knows whether to judge, or it has this automatic habit of saying, I like this or I don't like that. And an innocence is where, you know, there's much that hasn't developed yet. And so, yes, everything is being seen fresh in a way, without a preconception of what it means and how it should be. And, you know, this is one of the big shifts, is to see life as it is rather than how we think it should be. Because how we think it should be is based on our idea that life should be pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. You know, and then we say to ourselves, why did God create handicapped children? When what I'm talking about is understood, that question doesn't make any sense. Why did God create handicapped children? Right? That question comes up when we think life should be just pleasure, 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 good, 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 nice, nice, nice. Right? When we understand there are evil people and there are extremely kind people in life. And so the evil people are going to do cruel things. And the kind people are going to do very loving things. So when that's understood, when we see something cruel happening, it doesn't mean we have to like it. Actually, we're not going to like it. But we're not going to be surprised by it because we say, oh, that's life. You know, we know in life accidents happen. So when we hear of a car crash, we're not going to like it. In fact, it might be very painful for us. Someone we love might have died in the car crash. But we won't have the question, why did this happen? Because we know life is car crashes, as well as all of the wonderful things in life.
Yes, like maybe 2 days ago, on Wednesday, I was in some meeting, and the teacher of the teacher, how to say in English, religious, catechet. You understand catechet, like the man who teach religion in school. No, not priest, but okay, but doesn't matter. So the person's like maybe not his, but his friend. My colleague was also said that like the best, the sister like answer the church what the suffering and this the motion of evil what is. This is like mysteries, as well, like I'm not, he said like it is, we don't know why, like it's like, yeah. There's also the story, of course, that the metaphor from Christian, that we know about this Lucifer, the part who like don't want to be like how to say,
No, but
surrender to God.
Jaroslav, we don't need
Yeah.
to make it okay. We don't need it to be mysterious, right? Just and we don't need to talk about Lucifer and God. We just are talking about life, right? People get sick, people win the lottery, and aeroplanes fall out of the sky, volcanoes happen, amazing developments in science, in nature happen. Life is duality, extreme pleasure and extreme pain. So that is the nature of life, right? It's undeniable.
It's from my part. Sorry, Raja, I will be like maybe some discussion here, because maybe I am idealistic. I like born with this ideological thinking that we are like the best, like the beauty, the truth, the goodness, and all these qualities is such like in perfect condition that we can like is the how to say, the paradise, and it's possible because of God intelligence. It's possible to have this like variety of goodness in different form, but this is such amazing thing that we can't comprehend this. So the evil is like not seeing this, and maybe I'm not sure, but maybe it's just my like intuition. So I want to like to present here this, and I just also want to tell you that. So I ask you, because you said that the me thing, that the psychological me is the like the responsible, the believing in me psychologically is like the reason of suffering. So why this happens? So this happening is just happening, or in your way, like we can call this like this is the devil, the believing that me, it's the little me, it's real, like we are the little me. So this is the wrong understanding. Maybe no. It's just to want to like.
Oh, well, so the belief that's the problem is I am the doer, right? It's a psychological belief that it's a psychological idea of who I am. I am the doer. The concept in the teachings is you're a biological instrument. I am a biological instrument through which consciousness is functioning, right? So there are two different ideas. I am the doer, or I'm a biological instrument through which life is happening, through which consciousness is functioning. So one of them is what I'm describing as the false idea of who we are. That since I am the doer means I am a separate entity. And what I need is life to be perfect. And so as soon as that gets put in place, then we need that identity wants life to be pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. And so I'm pointing out, this is the important part, that life is a mix of pleasure and pain. And so if we start to see that, right, just like really simple concept that you go, is it true that life is sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain? And if you say, yes, it is.
Interrupt you. But so you can say that you truly, you are saying for us that 50% of your time you feel pain and 50% of your time you feel pleasure. I can think that more of the time you feel like pleasure, like harmony, good things. Some from time to times when somebody like me maybe put you some difficult question or something like that, you maybe feel some pain. Maybe I'm not sure. Like, because I know you are kind and you like present the teaching, but from your like Roger body person, like let's say person, okay? So do you feel like 50% type of pain and under 50 pleasure, or yeah?
I'm not saying that we feel 50% pain and 50% pleasure. I'm saying life is a mix of pleasure and pain,
Okay.
right? And how much pleasure and how much pain life is going to deliver to us is unknown. In each moment, in the next moment, life will deliver pleasure or pain, right? And that pleasure or pain is dependent on whether life is in line with our preference or not. Suffering is a different thing. Suffering is your attitude to the pleasure or pain, right? So that's what we now. These concepts need to be understood. If they're not understood, there won't be freedom through this teaching, right? Someone might listen to some other teaching and understand and be affected by another teaching. But the difference between suffering and pain in this teaching needs to be understood. The suggestion that what we're looking for is peace of mind needs to be understood. And peace of mind is the end of suffering. And one of the big forms of suffering is wanting life to be different to how it is. And what I'm saying is that life is sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain. And what we want psychologically is for life to be how we imagine it should be, which is pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. So what I'm describing is, let's get into the mind frame of seeing life as sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain, and allowing it to be as it is.
Yes. I don't have problem with surrender to whole experience. I can say that I agree with you in this part. Yes. So okay. So can I remember, because I'm not sure that you remember, Roger, that maybe a month ago, maybe I can say I tell you where I send you some question like a month ago in Messenger, and because you are you have your own life, and you answered that it's difficult to answer because these things takes a lot of time, and you have some duties on your own. So can I maybe read this, and do you want to find some time to answer on this? Can I?
Yes, but the thing is, in the satsang, it's good to share the time around. So
Okay.
You came on with a question, and we've spoken for 15 minutes, which is good. So I don't think we should go into a whole new topic, which will take another 15 minutes. Because
yes, yes.
if you come on next time with that question, then we can address that.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jaroslav.
Thank you.
Hello, Krishna.
Hey, Roger, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good too. Thank you so much for doing these free satsangs. It's really nice of you to spend a few hours every week to speak with us.
You're welcome.
And I sometimes thank the pandemic, because that's the reason why we started these remote meetings in a way. So trying to see the positive end of it. I just had a quick question. I was speaking to a friend of mine who has a lot of health anxiety, and basically, just because of the pandemic and various other reasons, and because I listen to your satsangs a lot, I just felt maybe that I could help him in a way. And I was trying to, explain some of the teachings of you, like basically maybe you should like stop trying to control the situations and accept or surrender to it, more or less. And he obviously responded as someone who isn't aware of any of these teachings, with the question that, how do I do that and stuff like that. And I said, maybe, you should just accept it as like God's will, and maybe you'll end up learning something, right? So this back and forth went on for a while. And then finally, I just answered saying that this is not something that you can do yourself. It just needs to happen. I guess I was just maybe telling him that this is sort of like a description, right? Not like a prescription, something that you can do. Maybe you need to take it as God's will and then accept it or surrender it. So I was just curious if how can you phrase the concept of like surrender or acceptance to someone who isn't well aware of any of these teachings. I was trying to be a little bit practical about it, and basically try to help him out. I don't know if that question makes sense, but I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, well, I mean, really, I think if we put forward a very simple example or general principle, like, is it clear to you that things are going to happen outside of your control? Like, you're getting news about having, like the pandemic, right? For example, it's sort of something that happens in life. No one was in control of it. The same when you get sick, it's not something someone controls, it just happens. And so many things in life we can see they sort of just happen even when we don't want them to happen. And sometimes on the positive side, a friend turns up in town, a friend you haven't seen, and out of the blue they say, would you like to catch up for lunch? So it just happens. And so if that's what I would put forward to someone, is that if you look at life, it really is happening outside of our control, and we get to experience what is happening. And if someone gets that, then there might be a surrender, right? Because you've just explained the very way that life turns out. If, on the other hand, their desire for control basically short circuits their brain from holding on to or thinking about that or that information that you've put forward, or really registering the so this same thing, you can apply for a job, whether you get the job or not in your control. You can ask someone to keep the music down, whether they keep the music down or not in your control. You can intend to go to the shops, whether you get shops not in your control, whether the items that you want to buy from the shops are there, not in your control, whether you your credit card works or it doesn't, not in your control. And so it's really very simple principle. The concept's very simple. If their makeup prevents them from hearing what you're saying, then the best thing, I think, is we have to accept, as the one trying to explain it, that the thinking structure is such that the notion hasn't been received, and therefore, in the same way as you say, it's not something you can do. It will either happen or it won't happen. Our attitude can be, okay, I've delivered the information, and now the outcome is not in my control.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. The last section is where I guess you sort of want to help him, at the same time you can't move away. And I guess it reached a point where I was trying to convince him that this is the truth, which maybe is probably not right, like you said. And it is practical, what you mentioned, right? Like things may or may not happen, but I guess he gets it intellectually, but just that inner notion, there's some struggle within the body, right? Like where you can see it in his eyes when he's like trying to argue with me, where I felt that, like maybe is there like a better way to phrase it so that a person can understand it? But I think what you're suggesting is even that is not in your control, I guess.
That's even exactly whether you have the urge to say something next time or not, who knows? And it will unfold exactly as it's destined to unfold. It always is.
Fair enough. Thank you so much again for these questions and patiently answering most of them. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Krishna. Thanks for dropping in. Hi, Sylvia.
Hi. I wanted to not know, but do you think that introducing meditation, just sitting meditation and then not knowing what would come out of that, do you think by introducing that, or do you do that in your daily life in order to have this manifestation happen to you? Because for me, this is how it works. I find that throughout the years when I've and I don't know why I have, but when I have meditated and when I just sit and not think of quieting the mind or having thoughts, just sitting, always turns out in a way the outcome turns out where it's always in the best possible situation it could happen. I could be angry, but that's okay. That the anger that will unfold will be exactly what's supposed to happen. I could be peaceful, and that's what's supposed to happen. So I find that by doing meditation has helped me a lot in relating to what you have to say, and so
so your question is, do I meditate? I haven't meditated for quite a while as a formal sitting down, but I think the attitude that you speak of in meditation, which is to just allow everything to be as it is the attitude that deepens in us more and more to the point where it is the natural way that we move through life. And it's really based on the understanding that life is a happening. Life is a happening of duality. Life isn't about being perfect, but life is about life happening. And so then that attitude of non-resistance is there, which means the holding on to the past, even the past of 5 minutes ago or 10 minutes ago, and feeling like, oh, I shouldn't have acted that way, and feeling uncomfortable because, you know, I did in the past. Essentially, you're moving into each moment is fresh. That's what the presence, when you know, when they, Eckhart Tolle's power of now is really the power of being in the present moment. And that only happens, it's not something that we have to make happen as an effort, but rather when the old habit of dwelling on how things should be, when that starts to fall away, because life is seen sort of more clearly, then this meditation becomes a natural part of everyday life without needing to specifically sit down. So, you know, when the habit of getting involved is still there, then it makes sense. When we see ourselves being involved, then we might sit down and remind ourselves to just allow everything to be as it is and calm down and not get so involved. And the more that happens, the more natural it becomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.